Welcome to Debridement Task Analysis. The first instrument in the starting lineup is the mirror. Next up, we have the 4R4L, which is a universal curette that can be used anywhere in the mouth. This is the 1-2 rigid Gracie, which is used on the facial and linguals of the anterior teeth. And here we have the 7-8 rigid Gracie, which is used from premolar to premolar, both buccal and lingual surfaces, and it can even be used on the molars. This is the 11-12 rigid Gracie, which is used on the mesial surfaces of the molars, from the distal line angle across the buccal or lingual surface and into the mesial contacts. You can see that the Gracies used on the molars start to have more bends in the shank, since the contour of the tooth starts to become more bulbous. And here is the 13-14 rigid Gracie. This is used on the distal surface of the molars, starting at the distal line angle and into the distal contact. The 15-16 rigid Gracie is used on the mesial surfaces of the molars, just like the 11-12, from distal line angle across the buccal or lingual surface and into the mesial contact. Whichever one you decide to use is based on clinician preference for the given scenario. And last but not least, here is the 17-18 rigid Gracie, which is similar to the 13-14 as it is used on the distal surfaces from the distal line angle and into the distal contact. Again, whichever distal Gracie you decide to use is clinician preference for the given scenario. And here is your setup. We have our cassette of rigid Gracies, a 4R4L universal curette, and a mirror. We also have our deniform and table mount. As you can see, the table mount just has a screw that will tighten it onto the table, and you just slide your deniform onto the metal portion and secure it with the screw. Make sure to adjust as needed to ensure proper ergonomics. For this scenario, a 17-18 rigid Gracie is a great instrument to use. The longer shank is able to reach all the way down into the pocket, and the curves help to properly adapt to the molar. To begin, you're going to divide the pocket in two sections, apically and coronally, so that you can do short overlapping strokes in the apical portion of the root and then again in the coronal portion of the root to ensure adequate calculus removal. Continue to work into the contact and then go back with horizontal strokes like demonstrated in this video, and keep the terminal shank parallel with the long axis of the tooth. Multi-directional strokes will help you make sure that there isn't any calculus left behind. For this scenario, a 7-8 rigid Gracie is a great choice because of the curve and length of the shank. It will be best for reaching down into the 5mm pocket. Work from the distal line angle to the mesial line angle using the short overlapping strokes, dividing the root into apical and coronal sections. Keep the terminal shank parallel to the long axis of the tooth and scale the apical portion of the root first, then move up to the coronal. And don't forget to utilize multi-directional strokes to make sure you are debriding all of the calculus off the tooth. Another thing to remember with scaling in general is to hold the instrument in a modified C-shaped grasp. Rock on a steady fulcrum to prevent injuries, and depending on the level of plaque or calculus present, utilize either the deplaquing or working stroke. For this scenario, the working stroke is most appropriate. For this scenario, the 4R4L universal curette is a great option because of the shorter shank. Insert the blade at a 40-degree angle and open up to scale at a 60 to 80-degree angle. Start from the distal line angle and move into the distal contact, using short overlapping and multi-directional strokes to remove all of the calculus. In this pocket, it is not necessary to divide the pocket into apical and coronal portions because the instrument can effectively remove the calculus in a shallower pocket. While scaling, like always, make sure to keep the terminal shank parallel with the long axis of the tooth. For this last scenario, the 4R4L universal curette is a great option for this area because the terminal shank is able to reach the bottom of the pocket due to the shorter shank and the pocket being more shallow. Like the last scenario, insert the blade at a 40-degree angle, open to a 60 to 80-degree angle, and begin scaling using short overlapping multi-directional strokes from line angle to line angle. And as always, make sure that the terminal shank is parallel to the long axis of the tooth. Here is a comparison chart between the rigid Gracies and the 4R4L curette. Rigid Gracies have a pre-adapted blade, making it easier to reach various areas. They are also area-specific curets, meaning that there is a different instrument for different surfaces. These curets work better on heavier calculus, but can be used for lighter deposits in plaque. Each Gracie has 2 ends with 2 blades, so finding the correct end is imperative for correct usage and adequate calculus removal. Due to the longer shank, these instruments work very well in deeper pockets. Always make sure to use the toe third of the instrument and pay close attention to specific angles when sharpening. For the 4R4L, the clinician must adapt the blade to the tooth, since it is a universal curet and not already adapted. This instrument works best on lighter deposits and shallower pockets, since the universal curets tend to have a shorter shank. And like the Gracie, use the toe third of the instrument while scaling, and make sure to pay attention to the angles while sharpening, even though the universal curet is less complex than the area-specific Gracie.
Shiny teeth that glisten just like a Christmas tree. You know they walk a mile just to see me smile. My shiny teeth and me, yes, they're all so perfect, so white and perfect.